Snow. Torchlight. Two packs facing each other across a line drawn in salt, and my sister's hand rising to point at me. Take her instead. Sella said it clearly. She said it twice, so no one could pretend they had misheard. Bracken tore the cloak off my back before the second word finished. The cold went through my shift like water through paper, and I remember the salt on the border stone, gritty under my bare feet, and the sound of my own pack turning around. Not one of them looked back. 30 wolves I had fed, 30 wolves I had bandaged, all of them very suddenly interested in the road home. I was still standing there, barefoot in the snow, when the king's shadow came down over me and stopped.
9 years.
That was the first thing he ever said to me. 9 years earlier, I was the one my mother told to be quiet. Chapter 1. The salt line was drawn every 7 years, and every 7 years a girl walked across it and did not come back. That was the treaty. Veskpak keeps its territory, its river, its hunting rights, and its throats intact. And the Crown of the North takes one bride in exchange, not a wife. Nobody used that word. My mother called her a bride the way you call a knife a tool, so you do not have to think about the other thing it does. I was 15 the first time I understood what it meant. I asked Isolde Vesk why the girl before had never written home, and my mother put her sewing down, and looked at me for a long moment, and then told me to be quiet, in a voice I had not heard her use before. Her hand went to her throat while she said it. She always did that. There is a burn across her neck, thick and flat and old, and she touched it the way other women touch a locket. I was quiet. I was quiet for 9 years. Being quiet in a pack is not the same as being invisible. Invisible would have been a kindness. Quiet means they still see you. They simply stop counting you. I fed the sick ones. I bound the ones who came back from raids with their ribs showing through, and I sat up with old Marrow the winter his lungs filled, and I held the bucket while he coughed himself hollow, and none of that entered the ledger of what I was worth, because I had no mate, no rank, and no use they could name in a sentence. My sister had all three. Selah was the pretty one, which in a wolf pack is not a small thing. It is a currency. Honey hair she braided into a crown every single morning, a little gold ring in her nose that caught the firelight, and a laugh she had practiced until it sounded accidental. She was not cruel the way Bracken was cruel. She was worse. She was casually cruel, the way you are casually cruel to a dog that keeps getting underfoot, and then genuinely bewildered when it flinches.
You have a sister.
He said that to me later, much later, and I laughed at him, and it came out wrong. The naming came in autumn. It always did. Bracken Hollow walked through the lodge with the tribute chain over his shoulder, and the pack gathered without being called, the way water gathers at the low point of a floor. He has one ear. He lost the other before I was born, and he has never once said how, which tells you exactly the kind of man he is. The name he read out was Selah's. I want to be honest about what happened in my chest when he said it. There was grief. There was. But underneath the grief, arriving faster than the grief, was a thought so ugly I have never spoken it aloud until now. Not me. That is who I was, standing in that lodge. That is the woman I was before the snow. I want you to know her, because the one who walked back across that salt line was not the same person, and I did not become her by being noble. The lodge smelled of wet wool and burnt fat, and the specific sourness of 30 people, who are all relieved at once. Selah did not scream. She went very white and very still, and she looked at our mother, and our mother looked back at her, and something passed between them that I could not read. I thought it was love. I thought I was watching a mother say goodbye to the daughter she had chosen, in front of the daughter she had not. It was instruction. For 11 days Selah was treated like a corpse that had not yet had the courtesy to lie down. Best cuts of meat, the good furs. Nobody made her work. And on the 12th day, they dressed her in the white shift, and put the salt in her hair, and walked her out to the border with 2 torches, and no drums, because the treaty forbids music at a handover. I carried the water skin. That was my role. 12 days of ceremony, and I was there to carry water in case the bride got thirsty on the way to her own death. The northern pack was already waiting. I had expected monsters. What I saw was worse. I saw men who looked bored, ordinary, cold, a row of dark shapes in the snow behind a man who did not move at all, and I understood without being told which one of them was the king, because the air behaved differently around him. Bracken stepped up to the stone. He said the words. He held out his hand for Sella, and my sister turned around.
Which of you is the bride?
She looked at me, and I saw her mouth open, and in the quarter second before the sound came out, I saw something I have thought about every day since. She was not afraid. She was not desperate. She was ashamed. She already knew what she was about to say, because someone had told her to say it, and she had agreed. Take her instead. 30 wolves. Nobody moved. Nobody said no, and nobody said yes. And I have come to understand that silence is not an absence of a decision. It is a decision made very quietly, by everyone, at the same time. Bracken tore my cloak off my back, and my mother, who had told me to be quiet for 9 years, who was standing close enough that I could hear her breathing, put her hand to the burn on her throat, and did not open her mouth. Chapter 2. I do not remember crossing the salt line. I remember being on the other side of it. There is a gap where the crossing should be, and I have stopped trying to fill it. Some part of me put the body in motion and switched the rest of me off, the way you bank a fire you cannot afford to feed. The king did not touch me. That surprised me more than anything that had happened yet. He looked at me with the eye that worked, and the dead one looked somewhere past my shoulder, milk pale and unmoving, and I thought, this is a man who sees you twice, and only half of him tells you what he found.
Give her the cloak, Rosen.
The woman who stepped forward had a shaved head and a crescent branded white into her temple, and she was easily 50 years old, and she was carrying a black cloak folded over her forearm like a butler at a house I would never be invited into. She put it around my shoulders. It swallowed me whole. It smelled of wood smoke and iron, and something faintly green, like crushed pine needles, and it was so warm from her body that I made a sound I am not proud of. Walk, she said. You'll lose the feet if you stand. I walked. Nobody spoke on the road north. 12 men, 1 woman, 1 king, and me. And the only sound for 3 hours was boots and breath. The snow was old and crusted, and it broke under us like a lid over something. I kept waiting for it, for the hands, for the knife, for whatever the treaty actually meant under all the words that had been laid over it for 100 years. I had been given 12 days to prepare for someone else's death, and about 4 seconds to prepare for my own, and I found that my mind kept doing something absurd. It kept making a list of everything I had not finished. The weaver's boy's splint needed changing on the 9th day. Nobody knew but me. Nobody would check. That is what I thought about, walking to my execution. A splint. The hold came out of the fog at dusk. Black timber, black stone, torches burning in iron cages along a wall so high I had to tip my head back, and above the gate, carved into the lintel, worn soft with age, 3 letters I did not recognize, and would not learn the meaning of for another month. Inside, there were women. Not slaves, not corpses, women. One was arguing with a man twice her size about a grain count and winning. One was carrying a child on her hip. One looked up as I came through the door with the king's own cloak dragging behind me in the mud, and she said, quite clearly, to nobody, 7 years already. Rosen took me to a room with a bed in it and a bath already steaming, and I stood in the doorway and did not move, because in 9 years nobody had prepared a single thing for me before I arrived. Get in, she said, before it goes cold. Where are the others? She stopped. She turned around slowly, and the brand on her temple caught the lamplight, and her face did something complicated. The others. The brides. My voice came out.
You are looking at one.
He was in the corridor behind me. I do not know how long he had been there. He filled the doorframe, and he did not come through it, and I understood, later, that he was standing outside on purpose, and that it was the single most courteous thing anyone had done for me in my adult life. I turned around. You're the first, I said to Rosen. It was not a question. The arithmetic had already done itself. 21 years. 28, she said. There was one before the treaty. Nobody counts her. I counted her. I sat down on the edge of the bed because my legs had made a decision without consulting me, and I looked at the king of the north, the monster of the border, the thing my pack had been feeding girls to for a century, and I asked the only question that mattered. Then what is it? 4. And Cain Varro, who by every account I had ever heard was the coldest creature ever to hold a crown, looked at me with his one living eye, and said something I have never been able to repeat without my hands shaking.
Ask your mother.
The bath went cold. I did not get in it. I sat on that bed in a dead woman's cloak until the torches burned down, and I turned it over and over, and every time it came out the same way, and every time I put it down and picked it up again hoping for a different shape. Ask your mother. He had never met her. He had never crossed the line. He had stood on his side of the salt for 20 years and taken what was handed to him, and he had known, before he knew my name, before he knew my face, exactly whose daughter I was, which meant somebody had told him. I found out 3 days later that there were 31 names carved into the wall of that hold, and only 7 of them belonged to brides. Chapter 3. They gave me a dress, green wool, laced boots that fit, and nobody watched me put them on, and that was the strangest part, the not being watched. For 3 days I waited to be told what my work was. Nobody told me. On the 4th morning I stopped waiting, and went and found some. There was a woman in the lower hall with a burn on her forearm going bad, the wet kind that goes bad quietly, and she had been packing it with grease, because that is what her mother taught her, and her mother was wrong. I took it apart, cleaned it out with boiled water and salt, and told her it would hurt more before it hurt less, and she swore at me in a dialect I did not know, and then she let me finish. That is how I came to be in the North Hall with my hands still smelling of pine tar, on the day I saw the wall. It ran the length of the room, floor to roof beam, and it was covered in names, cut into the black stone, deep, by different hands in different years, some of them so old the chisel marks had gone soft. I counted them the way I count everything. 31. 7 brides, 24 other people. I stood there long enough that my feet went numb on the flags, and the cold came up through the boot soles into my knees, and I read every name twice, and then I found her. Isolde Vesk. 4th from the top, older cutting, a different hand. My mother's name is on the wall of a hold she has never entered, in a country she has never crossed into, above a woman who died before I was born.
You found it faster than I expected.
He was behind me. No coat, no crown, sleeves rolled, iron rings on both hands, and he looked less like a king and more like a man who had been carrying something heavy for a long time and had just now put one end of it down. Explain the wall. You explain it, he said. You're the one who counts. I turned on him. I had spent 9 years not saying things, and something in me had come loose out in that snow and had not gone back into its housing. There are 31 names, and only 7 of them are brides. The others are men, children. There's a boy on there who can't have been more than 10. This is not a treaty. A treaty takes 1 girl every 7 years, and you have been taking people whenever it suited you. Yes. Say the rest of it. He looked at me for a long moment with the one eye that worked.
They were all going to be killed, every one of them. Not by me, by their own.
The hall was very quiet. Somewhere behind us a fire settled in the grate with a sound like a bone giving way. The bloodline runs quiet in some packs, he said. It skips, it hides, and when a pack finds it in one of their own, they do not celebrate. They drown her. They call it a mercy, and they do it in the river before the pack council can be told. Because a pack that carries the old blood gets taxed, gets raided, gets noticed. So you take them. So I take them. And I let every pack on this border believe I eat them. Because a monster is the only thing they will hand a living girl to without a fight. He said it flatly, the way a man reads out a figure he has looked at 1,000 times. 20 years of being the worst thing in the North. It works. It has never once failed to work. I heard myself laugh. It was not a good sound. You let them think you murder children so you can keep the children. I let them think whatever keeps the door open. I put my hand flat on the wall. The stone was so cold it burned, and I remember that specifically, the ache of it going into the heel of my palm, because I needed something real to hold on to. My mother's name is on this wall. Yes. She's alive. She's 60 miles south of here, with a burn across her throat, and she has never in her life said one word about any of this.
She is the only one who ever went back.
I want to tell you that I understood it then. I did not. I stood in that hall with my hand on my mother's name, and I felt nothing at all, the way you feel nothing at all when the axe first goes in, and the body has not yet worked out what has happened to it. She went back. She was carried across that line as a girl, and she came back, and she never told a living soul, and she raised 2 daughters in a pack that would have drowned them both, and she taught one of them to braid her hair, and be pretty, and be safe. And she taught the other one to be quiet. She was not protecting Sela. She was hiding me. 9 years of be quiet, Mara. 9 years of a hand going to a burn scar every time I asked a question. 9 years I spent believing my own mother had looked at me and found me worth less than the other one. And every single day of it she was standing between me and the river. And when Bracken came with the chain and read out the wrong name, she did the only thing left that she could do. She sent the wrong daughter home and sent the right one north, to the only man in the world who would keep her alive. She sold Sela's honor to save my life, and she did it without telling either of us, and she will die with it in her mouth. The burn on her throat. I had looked at that scar every day of my life. They did not mark her. She marked herself. So they would never look at her neck and see whatever it is you can see on a girl who carries the old blood. I did not cry. I want to be truthful about that, because you have stayed with me this long, and you deserve the truth. I did not cry. I got cold, and it was a better cold than the snow had been, and I have never entirely lost it since. How long do I have? I said. Cain did not pretend to misunderstand.
Bracken Hollow rides for this hold in 6 days. He is bringing your sister, your mother, and 40 wolves, and he is going to accuse me of breaking the treaty.
On what grounds? He looked at me, and for the first and only time in that entire winter, the King of the North looked tired.
On the grounds that the bride I was handed is still breathing.
Chapter 4. 6 days. I did not sleep through any of them. Rosen found me on the second night in the North Hall with a tallow candle and a scrap of hide, copying the names off the wall in charcoal, and she stood in the doorway for a long time before she said anything. They're already carved. Stone doesn't travel, I said. She came and sat down on the flags next to me, 50 years old with a brand on her temple, and she took the charcoal out of my hand and started on the 4th column, and neither of us mentioned it again. That is the thing nobody tells you about the ones who survive. They do not want to talk about it. They want to work. I learned the hold in 6 days the way I had learned Vesk in 9 years. Where the grain went, who owed who, which of the 24 had come out of which pack, and what lie had been told about each of them afterward. A boy called Tam had been reported drowned by his own uncle in the spring floods. He was alive. He was 17. He was 3 rooms from me, and he had a laugh like a door coming off its hinges. Every name was a lie somebody was still telling. I wrote them all down, all 31. And beside each one, I wrote the pack that had reported them dead, and the year, and the word they had used. Drowned, fever, wandered off, took by the cold. Bracken Hollow came out of the fog on the 7th morning, with 40 wolves at his back. They stopped at the gate. He would not come in, and he sent word that the king should come out, and Cain sent word back that the king eats indoors like a person, and if Bracken Hollow wished to speak, he could do so under a roof like a wolf, and not in a field like a dog. He came in. Of course he came in. They filled the great hall, 40 of them along one wall, silent, armed under their coats and pretending they were not. Bracken in the middle, with the tribute chain over his shoulder, one ear, white beard, and that boiled leather that creaked every time he breathed. Sela behind him in her pale blue, hands folded, the gold ring in her nose catching the fire. And my mother. Isolde Vesk in her black shawl, iron gray, still, and she looked at me across that hall for the first time since the salt line, and I saw her eyes go to my throat. Not my face, my throat. She was checking whether I was marked yet. Bracken did not waste time. He never has. He put it in front of the hall in the flattest voice he owns. The treaty says a bride is a life given. This one is standing there in a green dress with her hair done, and the whole north can see she has not been given at all. He turned to the wolves along the wall. Then he turned back. Blackwood has broken the treaty. Vesk claims recompense. Vesk claims the river, the eastern grazing, and the crossing.
That is a great deal of land for one girl.
It is a great deal of insult, Bracken said.
It is what you came for. Say the true thing at least once, Hollow. You are 60 years old.
And Bracken smiled, and I understood that the treaty had never been the point, and that my sister's name had never been the point, and that they had been waiting 100 years for a king to be careless enough to leave a girl breathing. I looked at my mother. She would not look back. And that, not the snow, not the cloak coming off my shoulders, not Sela's hand rising to point at me. That is the moment I stopped waiting to be rescued by anybody. I walked out into the middle of that hall. Nobody had asked me to. Kane did not stop me. I felt his eye on the side of my face, and he did not say one word, and I have thought a great deal since about what it cost a man like that to stand still. Bracken Hollow, I said. How did the weaver's boy die? The hall went quiet in that specific way, not respectful, interested. Fever, he said. When? Spring. Which spring? He said nothing. Tam Weaver is 17 years old, and he is standing in the second gallery of this hold behind you and to your left, and he has been there since the spring you say he died in. I did not raise my voice. I have never once had to. Turn around, Bracken. 40 wolves turned around before he did. The boy stood up.
Say the next one.
Merritt Vale. Drowned, you said. 11 years ago. She is in the kitchens of this hold, and she has 2 children, and neither of them has ever been told what pack they come from. Old Kell. Wandered off in the dark. He did not wander. Your father put him across a horse, and sold him at the salt line for a cart of grain, and there are 9 wolves standing along that wall, old enough to remember the cart. I turned in a slow circle, and I looked at every one of them. 31 names, I said. 24 of them were reported dead by their own pack. All of them are alive. All of them are here, and every single one of you standing along that wall has told a lie to a mother about where her child went. The hall did not erupt. That is not what happens. What happens is much worse and much quieter. Men look at the floor, and men look at each other, and a room reorganizes itself without a single person moving their feet. Bracken Hollow understood that he had lost the hall about 2 seconds after I did. So he did the only thing he had left. He turned to my mother, and he said, Isolde, tell them your daughter is a liar. And the hall turned to look at a 60-year-old woman in a black shawl who had not spoken a word in 9 years. She lifted her chin. She put her hand to her throat, the way she has every day of my life, and she pulled the shawl away from the burn.
Isolde Vesque, 4th name on my wall.
Bracken Hollow drew. I did not see him do it. I was looking at my mother's throat. What I remember is the sound, boiled leather creaking, 40 wolves inhaling at once, and Selah screaming my name in a voice I had never heard her use. The blade went through the shoulder of a green wool dress, and it was not mine. Chapter 5. Selah had stepped in front of me. She was not brave. I want that in the record, because she is my sister, and she deserves the truth more than she deserves the flattery. She did not decide to do it. There was no noble moment. Her body simply moved before her mind could stop it, which is a thing I have come to understand, is the only honest test there is. The blade went in above her collarbone and came out the back of the shoulder, and she made a small sound, more surprised than anything, and she sat down on the flagstones of a hold 60 miles from home, in a pale blue dress, and looked at her own hand, as if it belonged to a stranger. I caught her. I had my hands in my sister's blood inside of 4 seconds, and my mind went entirely, perfectly clear, the way it does. I have never once panicked in my life, and I have stopped apologizing for it. Pressure. Here. Both hands, lean on it, do not be gentle. Rosen was already beside me. She did not ask. 50 years old, brand on her temple, and she put her whole weight on my sister's shoulder, like a woman who has done it before. And behind me the hall came apart. 40 wolves had watched Bracken Hollow put a blade into an unarmed girl in a king's hall under a king's roof, and I did not have to say one word. It is very difficult to keep telling yourself a story about who the monsters are, when the monster is the man you rode in with.
Hold him. Nobody kills him.
9 of his own put Bracken Hollow on the floor. His own. The ones old enough to remember the cart. He did not shout. He looked at me while they held him down, and there was no hatred in it, and that was the worst thing about it. There was calculation. He was already working out what he could still trade. I did not look at him for very long. I had a hole in my sister to close. She lived. I will tell you that now, because I know what it is to be made to wait for it. She lived, and she has a scar that runs down from the collarbone in a hard white line, and she cannot lift that arm above her head, and she braids her hair one-handed now, badly, and she has never once complained about it in my hearing. The first thing she said when she came back to herself, 3 days later, with the fever down and the wound packed and my mother asleep in the chair beside her, was this. They told me you'd be treated well.
Who told you?
He was in the doorway. He is always in the doorway. It took me a long time to work out that he does it, so that women in rooms have a way out that does not go through him. Mother, Sela said, the night before, she told me you would be safe and I would not be, and she told me to say it clearly, and to say it twice. She was crying. It was the first honest crying I had ever seen her do, and I said yes. Mara, I said yes. I would have said yes for a coat. I sat down on the edge of the bed. Here is what I could have done. I could have made her carry it. She had earned it. Every word she said was true, and none of it excused anything. And I could have taken that girl's guilt and worn it around my neck for the rest of my life like the tribute chain. But I had spent 9 years being made small by people who found it useful, and I had just discovered that I was not going to become one of them. You stepped in front of a knife for me, I said. So we are going to have to find something else to talk about. The treaty ended in the Great Hall 6 days later, and it ended in the most ordinary way imaginable. A room full of tired people signing something. I wore the white shift. That was deliberate. I want to be very clear that it was deliberate. They had dressed my sister in it to walk her out to her death, and my mother had worn one 28 years before her, and Rosen before that, and it had been the last thing 7 women were ever seen alive in. So I put it on, and I put my own belt over it, and I put a blade on the belt. And I walked into that hall, and let every wolf in the north look at the dress they had been feeding to a monster for 100 years, and watch it walk in on its own 2 feet, and sit down at the table with a pen. Nobody said a word about it. They did not have the language. The terms were mine. I wrote them. Every name on that wall is spoken aloud, once a year, at the salt line, in front of both packs, so that no pack may ever again bury a living child in a story. The old blood is declared, registered, and protected, and any pack that drowns one of its own for carrying it forfeits its territory to the crown. The tribute ends. The bride ends, and the crossing stays open, in both directions, permanently, so that a girl who is carried north as a child can walk south as a woman and see her mother's face without asking anyone's permission. Bracken Hollow was given to his own pack. They did what they did. It is not my business, and I did not ask. My mother stayed until the spring. We did not have a great reconciliation. She is not built for it, and neither am I. And I think we both understood that a scene would have been a kind of lie. What we had instead was this. She came to the North Hall one evening, and found me at the wall with a chisel and a candle, cutting the 32nd name into the black stone. The boy who had been born to Merritt Vale in the kitchens, who has never had a pack and now has a wall. She stood beside me and watched for a long time. Then she took the chisel out of my hand, and she finished the last letter herself, and her hands were steadier than mine. I could not tell you, she said. I know. If you had known, you would have been proud of it. You were always going to be proud of it. She put the chisel down. Proud girls go in the river. That is the only apology I have ever had from Isolde Vesk, and it is the only one I have ever wanted. Cain asked me to stay, and he asked me badly. He is a man who has spent 20 years constructing himself into the most frightening thing on the border, so that frightened people would hand him their children, and it turns out that a man who is that good at being feared is almost entirely useless at being wanted. He said, "There is work here." I said, "That is the worst proposal in the recorded history of the North." He said, "It was not a proposal." And then he stood there in the doorway of the North Hall, with his one living eye and his iron rings, and he looked at the wall of names for a while, and he said the true thing, finally, the way he does, late, flatly, and completely without defense.
I have kept 31 people alive, and I have not been able to say a single word to any of them. You walked into my hall and read my wall out loud. Stay, not because it is safe here. Stay because you are the only person who has ever looked at what I built and understood what it cost.
I stayed. Not that night. I made him wait until the thaw, because I am my mother's daughter, and because a woman who has spent her whole life being taken is entitled to spend a little while being asked. Go back to the beginning with me. The snow. The salt line. 2 packs and a girl with no cloak on. You saw a woman thrown away. So did I. So did every wolf standing in that snow. And that is precisely why it worked. Because the thing about being handed over is that everybody watching has already decided what they are looking at. But there was one man on that border who knew exactly whose daughter had just been pushed across it, and there was one woman standing behind me in a black shawl who had spent 9 years teaching me to be quiet for the sole purpose of keeping me alive long enough to reach him. I was not thrown away. I was sent. The two people who loved me most had no way to tell me, and no way to save me except by making it look, to every single person in that snow, like nobody was saving me at all. I still have the cloak. It hangs on the back of the door in the North Hall, and it is far too big for me, and I have never once been tempted to have it cut down. Some nights, when the hold is quiet and the fire is low, I sit under it with a candle, and I read the names on that wall. 32 of them now, every one of them, a person somebody was told to forget. That is the whole of it. That is what a library is for. Someone has to sit up late and keep the names, and read them out, and refuse to let the story end the way they wrote it. Stay warm out there. Stay counted. I will keep the fire lit.